So Sam Dotson is out as chief of police in the city of St. Louis. When I remember still working as a reporter at Channel 4 years ago, when Sam Dotson basically became the chief's director of security and right-hand man, even though he was still in the police department. And everybody kind of assumed at that point that the minute they got local control, he was going to be the chief. He and the mayor at the time were tight. And then he considered running for mayor. The mayor told him, you can't do that. You're going to have to retire if you're going to do that, or resign. And he withdrew from the race. So you had to figure there's a little bit of tension there potentially between he and Krewson, because she knows that ultimately he wouldn't mind being mayor of the city. And lo and behold, today, on her first day, full day in office, he announced his retirement. I don't know if she forced it or if it was his plan all along, but Sam Dotson is out as chief of police. So it brings us really good timing, because it brings us to this issue of what sort of mayor will Lyda Krewson be in the city. My suspicion is she's going to be left of Francis Slay, I suspect. But Michael Chance is joining us. He's been a Republican committee man and involved in politics here in the city for many, many years. And Michael, good to have you in the studio.
It's great to be back here on 97.1 again.
Absolutely. Get a little bit closer to the mic there for me, or pull it down a little if you need to. The primary, I held out hopes that maybe Mr. Jones would round up enough people who were unhappy with maybe how African Americans mishandled the primary, that they might get together in the general election and Jones might have had a chance. But of course, she still won by 60%.
60%, although less than Francis Slay beat me by 16 years ago.
That's right, when you ran for mayor, I remember that.
Yeah, so some good news there. Pretty much he did about what the Republican base turns out here in the city in the last several years. So most of the Republican candidates, statewide, national candidates, back in November got around 20%. That's about the same numbers percentage-wise that Andrew Jones got, which was pretty astounding. I mean, 10,000 votes, 10,000 Republican votes in a spring mayoral primary, the general election race, is a pretty good turnout, actually.
That's good. Yeah, he should be proud, and hopefully he'll still be on the scene, and maybe he'll
I really
take
do
another
hope he
run
does
at
stay
it.
around
Yeah.
and stay involved and stay active and put his voice out there on issues as we go forward. I think he's a welcome voice that we need here in the city.
I admittedly don't know as much about Lyda Krewson as I would like to. I remember, of course, where she came from and that tragedy involving her first husband years ago, and that kind of got her active in politics. And the thing that sticks out in my mind about her is that she is an anti-gun person, and maybe it stems from the incident where her husband was murdered. But regardless, even recently on the Board of Aldermen, she had a bill that would basically restrict semi-automatic weapons and what she called assault rifles, and it was a pretty poorly written bill as I looked at it. I don't think it ever even got out of committee, but it kind of speaks to her mindset when it comes to that issue.
Yeah, it does, and that's going to be one of the things we're going to see going forward. In a lot of respects, this may end up being Francis Slay's fifth term.
Okay.
She's very much in that same mold. However, as you mentioned earlier, she is to the left of him on a number of issues, gun control being one of them, the abortion issue being another one, while Francis Slay would make tacit supports for the pro-abortion positions. He really tried not to get into that subject at all. Lyda Krewson, on the other hand, was one of the big supporters of this abortion sanctuary city bill that the Board of Aldermen passed, that was strongly opposed by the Archdiocese here and other pro-life organizations. So we're seeing some of that. There is a really interesting tension going on in the city right now. She only got about 35% of the vote during the Democratic primary. There was a very much larger percentage of people on the Democrat side that are now very strong progressives. And those numbers beat hers, but they were split between multiple candidates. At the same time, you have this 20% Republican base, in addition to maybe another anywhere from 10 to 20% that are what we used to call blue dog Democrats, conservative Democrats, a lot of union households, but are very conservative on fiscal matters, on Second Amendment rights, on personal liberty rights. And so all of that mix is playing out right now in the city as you're seeing the progressives really going after more and more seats on the Board of Aldermen.
Sure.
And a lot of the more conservative areas of town, the more conservative voters, are sort of scrambling to say, where do we go? Who's going to be our voice in City Hall? The loud voices right now are those progressive voices.
Sure. The sanctuary abortion bill that you mentioned, we've termed it the sanctuary abortion bill, but basically what they did was write protections for reproductive rights into the discrimination laws for the city of St. Louis. And
however, they did it in such a way that if an employer expressed a pro-life view in the workplace, they could be sued for discrimination. Right, a building owner could not refuse to rent space to an abortion provider for any reason, and there was even the way the wording on that bill is written. It's possibly even that the archdiocese or other religious organizations, simply by expressing their protected right to promote pro-life causes. Maybe not for there was a carve out for employees of those religious organizations, but not for their contractors. So if a contractor came in and said, "Well, I'm offended by this pro-life, anti-abortion poster," they could be sued.
That's unbelievable.
And so those are those loud voices. The minimum wage issue that the state legislature just shot down was another one. And we were already. I mean, if you look at some of the other areas around the country, California, Seattle, where they've passed those things, restaurants have taken the initial biggest hit, and the same thing was starting to trickle into St. Louis. There was going to be a hit to the city's budget because they were going to have to pay more for not just simply city employees but contractors.
Sure.
And the city right now is facing about a $20 million deficit, shortfall in next year's budget. The Board of Aldermen, that's going to be the first thing that this new board is going to have to wrestle with. Is the Rams aren't here anymore. And that leaves a big hole, even though the convention center tries to say, "Whoa, we've got much better revenues coming from because we can book more conventions." I'm not so sure the numbers are going to pan out on that. You've had folks in from the Show Me Institute about that. The NGA is not going to be in their new facility for years.
Yeah, it'll take them a while to get that
right,
built.
And we've got to pay for all of that up front, and then. There's more lawsuits coming from a variety of different angles on different policies they've put in place.
Clearly, the answer is a new soccer stadium. That would have fixed everything.
All we need is a fourth more, sports facility downtown, and that'll solve everything.
We're talking to Michael Chance. He was formerly a candidate for mayor of the city, and he's been involved in Republican politics down here for a long time. I brought him in to kind of focus on where he thinks Lyda Krewson goes. So she staked her position in the Board of Aldermen with some pretty progressive policies like this abortion issue and anti-gun issue. She did say that one of her yesterday in her fairly vague statements about this, she wants to increase law enforcement. She wants to, crack down. But in the meantime, progressives across the country in places like L.A. and Chicago and these other places are trying to instruct their police on how to not engage in good police work, in proactive police work. And I don't know how she's going to strike that balance to get the crackdown on crime she wants without letting the police go out and do their jobs.
There are going to be, this is one point I don't envy being in that job right now, because there are going to, and in her position and in her party, because you get these massive tensions. As I said, you've got a significant portion of the population that is really, really concerned about security and law enforcement and good policing. Police department is half the size that it was, in the 1970s.
Right.
And everybody says, well, the population's down. that doesn't matter. It takes just as long to get from Grand and Arsenal to Kings Highway and Delmar today as it did, 30, 40 years ago. And half-empty neighborhoods are actually more difficult to police than new ones. At the same time, those progressive voices, the Black Lives Matter voices, Antonio French, even though he's now no longer on the board, he's not going away. They're going to be demanding, a chief of police that's going to be sympathetic to their views of how the police should or should not behave, and a lot of that is going to be, we don't want them in our neighborhoods.
Yeah, they're going to want them to address things like use of force. In fact, and
there are issues around that.
Yeah.
that where we can have a conversation between the law and order, proponents and the people who think that all cops are bad. Right? There is some middle ground there, but in a lot of cases, they don't want to have that discussion. They just want they want their way or the highway, and that's the tension that she's going to walk into. How is she going to? I mean, the process for getting a new police chief,
right,
is going to be
so
from a visual standpoint more important than the actual selection of a qualified chief of police for the city of St. Louis.
Absolutely, in politics, and she's appointed a director of equality or something like that. I saw in the paper. You got to wonder what role that's going to play in the selection of the chief. So all that aside, let me ask you your opinion on Krewson versus Slay when it comes to this issue of a city-county merger. Slay was in favor of some sort of sharing of resource kind of thing. I understand they've already had meetings sort of talking about it. Do you see her as being more aggressive in trying to either move the city back into the county as a municipality or work on some sort of sharing of resources as a merger?
I don't know.
No?
She's not really been very clear about where she stands on that issue, and none of her track record as an alderwoman really points to how she is. Now, her ward is one that's right on the border between the city and the county. And is affected very much by, it's real easy for a business to move from the Central West End out to Clayton.
Yeah.
It's not that far to move. And for instance, part of the Washington University campus, part of it's in the city in the 28th ward, part of it's, and most of it's in the county. And so she sees those tensions. In a lot of cases, she may not really see a solid line the way some of the other people in either the city or the county see it.
Well,
it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, especially the fact that that's not really going to be high on her agenda right now. There are much bigger issues, like I said, the budget, economic development, and that's really where she's made her bones as an alderperson, is the redevelopment and the resurgence of the Central West End. But in doing that, she sort of use Slay's playbook, the standard Democratic playbook of, we're going to pick who gets to be the winners and losers.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, this is something that a lot of people just don't get. Every time city government has to use special tax conditions, special TIFs, tax abatements, that's an admission that the way they treat everybody with the tax code in the city and the business development policies is a failure, and they have to grant exceptions.
Right. Yeah, it's a great point, and we'll keep a close eye on that merger issue, because if she starts getting more aggressive in that, obviously something we'll talk about on this show. And I'd love to have you back in sometime, Michael. Thank you.
Anytime. Just give me a call, and we'll work it out.
Excellent. Love your insight on what's going on here in city politics. Appreciate that. That's Michael Chance, my guest this hour. Coming up next, we're going to get Annie Fry in here. We'll talk about some Chicago stuff. We can talk more about this Bill O'Reilly mix-up, if that's what you're